Good afternoon. Tim Goff here, CEO and founder of myGroundForce, and your host for the Taking Care of Business podcast. Today, we are having our first podcast in our new podcast studio. We have a purple carpet. You probably can't see it, but in the future, we'll be welcoming folks onto the purple carpet. The first guest that's going to join us on the purple carpet is my close friend, Alex Frum, owner of Alpha Kilo Logistics, one of the top contractors in the whole network. I'm sure all you guys know Alex. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, there he is. He's got a brand new shirt on. So look, there's a lot going on. We have a lot of things to talk about today. What Alex and I try to do is once a year when the new contract comes out, the TSPA, then we go through it, particularly Alex does. He talks to senior executives at FedEx. He gets answers to questions that everybody will have. And then we're going to have a conversation about those things. The first order on the agenda today is we're going to talk about the move to rail. And Alex and I have had long conversations about this with folks in the know. And so we're going to share that information with you today. It is up to date, and it comes from the people in FedEx in the know. Once we finish that conversation, 10, 15 minutes, we're going to move into the new TSPA. We're going to focus on a couple of things, particularly trucks, and then also the new safety tech requirements. And we'll talk about that for a while, and then that's going to leave several minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes for questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see where it says Q&A. Please start entering your questions there as you go along, or if you might already have some questions. And then in the new studio, the way we're set up is I can't see your questions, but my assistant is going to send those to me, and I'm going to look at them on my phone, and I'm going to pose them to Alex. So here we go. Start sending your questions in, and you'll see me looking at the camera, but I'll also be looking down when Alex is talking to show him the respect he most richly deserves. So again, Alex, welcome. So move to rail. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's been talked about in FedEx as part of a key element of their transformation going all the way back to 2022. But it had been kind of the animal laying in the woods, and no one had seen anything from it. And then 3 years later, in this transformation, then it pops up, a month, about in the middle of July, then people started getting notified that they were going to be losing their runs, and there were all sorts of things going on with that. And there was Facebook exploding and my email exploding, and I talked to a lot of people. And so we know it's a key topic to discuss. And so I'm going to let Alex take the floor here and tell us what he knows about the move to rail, and I'll have a couple questions for him. So Alex, why don't you share with us the move to rail from your perspective and what you've been hearing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. So as Tim discussed, this is something that FedEx had announced back in 2022. But we didn't really see the full impact until recently. There were a couple of markets where they were testing it out to see if it made sense. And then after the test out period, they kind of rolled it out more efficiently. So this all rolls back down into how does FedEx move freight across the country in the most efficient manner? How does FedEx maximize the miles that it drives or transports packages at the cheapest way possible in the most timely, efficient manner? So what the move for rail is taking lanes. So when I say lanes, is taking a run that moves from one destination to another. Say Memphis to Rialto is a lane, okay? And so FedEx analyzes that lane and determines whether or not that freight on that lane needs to be there next day, needs to be there in 2 days, needs to be there in 3 days, needs to be in 4 days, etc. And stuff that FedEx can deliver to a destination in 4 days or longer, that stuff isn't eligible to be moved to rail because it's not time sensitive. So, for example, moving something from Savannah, Georgia to Tracy, California, that's probably a 5-day lane or maybe even 6. That's something that can be effectively moved from rail, from Savannah, and then straight to Denver, Colorado. That's an 18-hour run And so that's a 2-day lane. So that means that freight that's loaded up there on a Tuesday is expected to be in Denver by Wednesday morning. It gets sorted and then it has to be delivered at the latest by Thursday. That's stuff that's not eligible to be transitioned to a rail because it doesn't have enough time for them to load it up on onto a port at a rail location and then shipped by rail to another location and then removed from the rail lines and then picked up by a tractor and then moved to a station or a terminal. Now, so are the runs going to be cannibalized? Yes. Anything that's going to be longer than 4 days is going to be cannibalized and moved to rail. So thinking Toledo to Rialto, thinking Noki to Tracy, California, thinking Memphis to Portland. All that stuff doesn't need to be in a specific location for 4 days or longer. That stuff can be transitioned to rail. Now, are there opportunities? Yes, there are opportunities on the solo side. So if FedEx needs to move freight to those rail locations, think Chicago, think Memphis, Toledo, Tracy, Portland, wherever there's a rail head, they're going to need solo runs to pick up those containers and move up to a station to get sorted or to move those containers back to the rail lines. And so there's going to be both the movement of full trailers and the movement of empty trailers by rail. Tim, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think you did. Of course, there's a lot of follow-up questions there. And first of all, just to be clear, this is all about teams, right? So solos are actually, there's going to be some benefit to solo operators potentially as these team runs get canceled. There's going to be solo runs. And for instance, in Noki, there's been a number of runs added to go from Noki up to Toledo at the railhead. There's been a lot of solos added there. And so solos will begin to appear in the hubs to transport freight to and from the railheads. And likely you may find yourself pulling containers. So that's a little bit of a different situation. But it's not just lanes that go all the way across the country, right, Alex? There's going to be some other lanes that are affected in the middle of the country.
You know, I haven't seen, I mean, it might be the case. I haven't really seen any kind of the lanes really disconnected in the middle of the country. Those are the lanes that are really going to benefit from this because most of those lanes are 2-day lanes. So if you think about like Milwaukee to Woodbridge, that has to be their next day, right? That's a 12-hour run. It has to go from Noki to Woodbridge. It has to make it there by the evening sort so it can get delivered out into the P&D vans the next day. Another one, for example, is Memphis. Boy, great. To sunrise sort in order so those packages get sorted and you put it in the pans. So it's a question about when is the packages due? When do they have to be sorted or when do they have to be delivered? And that's going to be the real functionality. I think a lot of the stuff in the middle of America is going to be safe because in the middle of America, if you're along that Mississippi or in the Mississippi Valley, you could head either coast within 18 hours. So if you're running from, say, Memphis to Rialto, you leave at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, you could be in Rialto by Wednesday morning. So does that meet that look fall? There are going to be a lot of around the different rail networks. So what's interesting is if you dive really deep into the rail networks, it won't really connect all that well. So there's an East Coast network and there's a West Coast network. Actually, there's 2 West Coast networks and there's technically 2 East Coast networks. You have Burlington Northern, you have Norfolk Southern, you have Union Pacific, and then you have
BNSF.
Yeah. So those networks kind of connect, but kind of don't connect. So, for example, Noki has a lot of freight that runs to Toledo and has a lot of freight that runs to Chicago. Well, you might ask yourself, why are they running to both Toledo and Chicago? And it's realistically, it's because it's 2 different rail networks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the things that you and I talked about a month ago was the scope of this move. And what you explained to me is there's 2,200 or so team runs in the network. and that something like 20% of those were going to be affected. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, the sense I've gotten from talking to FedEx leadership is that they think that there's probably around 400 runs that are in the network that are longer than 4-day runs or 3-day runs that are eligible for movement to the rail. Is all of that going to happen immediately? No, FedEx doesn't do anything immediately. As we're seeing with 2.0, it takes a while for them to migrate through this process, and it's going to probably happen with the same way with the team runs. So you're going to see, certain network or certain markets get rid of their team runs and then try to find a new opportunity for them. So what's happening with these team runs is they're either being moved to the other or they're being converted into slower runs, or there might be converted into a new team run opportunity. For example, Memphis doesn't have any; it's not losing any runs, but they're actually adding more team runs to the network right now because they're finding there's more freight that's being developed in the Mississippi Valley. Now, Okie is a different story. Those runs that are cannibalized are probably going to be converted to solos, I would imagine. Toledo, it sounds like they're moving those runs either to the unassigned or they're offering them up as solos, or you're going to lose the run and they're just going to become a spare run points.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that FedEx has a track record in this transformation of proceeding according to a plan, and we're probably maybe 25% through the potential change as the impact on the network with respect to this move to rail. And again, it's not going to be a net negative. We're not suggesting that. But what we're trying to do here is be realistic. This is not a negative conversation. This is just a realistic conversation and transition and transferring information to folks as we have it. So probably over the course of the next year is when you're going to see this move to rail, get completed. It's not done yet. In other words, now,
No.
Alex, one of the most, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Exactly. When I'm looking at my team runs or when I'm evaluating another business, what I really want to understand is what is the turnaround time on that freight? Okay, so that's something that you need to understand. Like if my tractor runs from, say you have a run right now that goes Chicago to Seattle, and you're running that and it looks great. Well, you really need to understand and take a look at it and say, okay, are they doing more than 2 turns a week? If they're doing less than 2 turns a week, that's probably something that's a really long lane that is probably eligible to be converted into rail. So understanding how many turns is getting done on that lane will help you understand if something is going to be eligible to move to rail or not.
Yeah, and Alex just touched on something that I think is one of the most important things to understand about the move to rail. So for FedEx, it's a strategic decision to lower their overall cost to deliver, and we know they need to do that. They have a target to cut 4 to 6 billion out of the network, and but as it affects contractors, and that's what we try to do in these conversations on taking care of businesses. Hey, these things are going on at FedEx. What does it mean for contractors? So Alex, let's talk about the impact on business valuation. And look, one of the things I try to coach folks on is everybody exits in every business. Is it McDonald's? Is it ice cream, or is it FedEx contracting? Everybody exits at some point, and you, as the owner of that business, your number one job is to manage the enterprise value of your company. And that's a function of the assets that you have. And your assets are really defined on your Schedule A1. Now, as this begins to roll out, your Schedule A1 has the potential, not for everybody, right? There's going to be, the whole network is not going to be affected, but maybe, 10 to 20% of contractors are going to be affected. And these runs, the changes in your A1 will affect your valuation. So, Alex, as an expert in enterprise value of these businesses, talk a little bit about how the valuation changes, because one of the things I teach folks is price for everything is 100% a function of risk. And so businesses that may have some risk and exposure to the move to rail 6 months from now, they may affect their valuation. Let's talk about that.
So I mean, so this actually goes into a little bit of the TSPA. So if you look at the TSPA in general, the BMR adjustments have been greater on the solo side than they have been on the team side. So you've seen probably a slight expansion in the margins that you generate on solo runs right now than you have seen on team runs. Historically, team runs have been the highest margin business to be in. But I think what you're seeing now is you're seeing a slow creep up where solo runs are becoming are getting better margins as they continue to expand the VMR there. So I think long term, team runs, in a good team run, and I'll use a perfect example. I have a run right now that goes from Memphis to Woodbridge. That's a run that's never going to go away. I think it's extremely valuable, and it just works really, really well. It leaves out at 9 o'clock in the morning. It has to be in Woodbridge by 4 in the morning the next day. It's a really valuable run. That's 5,500 miles. It's a number one or number two in its lane. That's something that's really, really valuable, right? So that run is going to continue to generate somewhere on the order of probably 3.5 times to 4.25 times EBITDA when you're looking at a purchase price. Solo runs, I mean, I tend to look at everything on an EBITDA or free cash flow model. And so that's where I see all the value. I don't like to put a number and say, hey, I pay $300,000 for a team run. I pay $125,000 for a solo run. I look at what is the cash flow that's generated by that run.
Absolutely.
Solo runs, I generally think a good back at the envelope before you do any analysis and really dive into the books. You should think that a solo run is going to generate you roughly somewhere between 18 and 20% margins. And a team run is going to generate numbers and say, okay, what are their costs? What are their fuel costs? What are their payroll costs? Then you have an idea of, okay, am I spot on with my assumptions on their margins, or do I need to make some adjustments? And then based off of that free cash flow or EBITDA number, that's the multiple that I'm willing to pay for.
Right. And we had a little bit of a glitch there. Alex, could you say again what your target margin is on the team run?
Yeah. So my target margin is somewhere between 20 and 27%.
Right. So I think the key point here is, if you're in Columbus and you have a Rialto run, that thing's probably generating you $500,000+ a year. And if you lose that run, you may get some replacements, but it may not add up to the same level of revenue that you had before. Is that what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I mean, if you're in Columbus, if you're in Toledo, if you're in Lehigh or Hagerstown and you're running to the West Coast, those runs are probably going to get shifted to rail over time. And vice versa. If you're running in Phoenix, if you're in Reno, if you're in Salt Lake, if you're in Denver and you're running all the way to the East Coast, you're running to the Woodbridge, Atlanta markets, stuff like that, those runs are probably going to go away. Now, if you're running midway across the country, if you're running from Salt Lake to, say, Salt Lake to Noki or Salt Lake to Chicago, that run probably sticks because you beat the rail. You're probably doing 2.5 turns a week. And that means that freight needs to be in a location within 3 days.
Yeah. So that's a good way to look at it. What we're encouraging business owners to do then is look at your assets, your Schedule A1, where you think you might have exposure to this move to rail, and you need to have a strategy on how you're going to deal with it if it happens. One of the things that you could potentially do is focus on saving the profits from those team runs at the moment. So if something happens, then you have enough money in the bank to protect yourself as you make the transition to whatever else might happen. And you may be learning to focus on how to maybe look at what is your cost structure? Is your payroll properly aligned? Are you minimizing your overhead, getting your best bang for the buck on that? And of course, my opinion is myGroundForce is the best tool to do that. But however you do it, you need to be looking at your numbers. And we talk a lot on this podcast. You have to know your numbers. And if you have 2 or 3 team runs that are going to the West Coast, and you would happen to lose that $1.5 million in revenue, and this is theoretical, it's very unlikely that you're going to accumulate enough solo runs to make up for that. And so you need to plan for that risk. And if you plan for it and it never happens, great. But if you don't plan for it and it does happen, then you may have some impact. So that's all we're trying to do here today is have a frank conversation about this move to rail and how it affects you operationally and how you should plan for it financially and understand the impact on your business valuation. Look, if you lose $1 million in revenue and you replace it with 500,000, your business has been devalued, and you need to prepare for that on your exit whenever you think your exit might be. Any last comments on this move to rail, Alex?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to take out of there, right? So you have to be opportunistic. Okay. So no business goes up in a straight line forever. Okay. There's going to be peaks and valleys to your business. But what you have to do is you have to opportunistically look at the situation and then, take advantage of the opportunities that are made available to you. So, I lost, a couple of years ago, I lost a Salt Lake run. It was, it came out of a situation. I used to run Memphis to Salt Lake. I used to run it 2.5 times a week. I lost the run. Did I crawl up into a low ball and cry about it? No, I made adjustments to my business model and continued to move on. I moved that team into an unassigned spot. So now I have 2 unassigned teams in Memphis. And then I look for more opportunities to grow. And I've continued to grow in that space. So, when I started my business, I started with 2 team runs and 2 solo runs in Memphis. Now I'm up to 6 team runs and I have 4 solo runs in Memphis. Okay, so even though I had a setback in my business, I continued to grow. And I didn't say, I'm never going to do teams anymore. Because teams are a very valuable part. What I learned from it is that to evaluate the opportunities. So, for example, I've decided not to bid on some team runs. I bid on other team runs when the opportunities arose because I didn't like what that team run was, or I was worried that it wasn't consistent freight. So there was an opportunity a long time ago where I could have bid on some Memphis to Portland runs. I didn't bid on those. I didn't want to do those runs. I had a bad experience with running Memphis to Salt Lake, and I didn't want to go through the same experience. And so instead of bidding on those runs, I bid on some Memphis to New Mexico runs. And so I took advantage of that opportunity and said, that's the business that I want.
Okay, now this was an extremely key point that Alex just made. Let me kind of translate for you. What Alex just said is he had a strategy on how he intended to manage his business, and then he opportunistically executed that strategy. We dropped a new podcast this week on Tuesday that talks specifically about strategy with one of the nation's experts on strategic development. If you haven't watched that podcast, I encourage you to watch it and take advantage of some of the things that we talked about in that podcast. And if you want to schedule a vision map with Lynn Sherrill so you can walk through your strategy and how to best present that strategy inside to your company and think it all the way through, hey, we can help with that. But Alex spends a lot of time analyzing what's going on in the FedEx marketplace and creating a strategy for his business. He aligns his business with the FedEx strategy and how that is playing out in the network. You need to do the same thing. And if you haven't done that, then we can help you with that, or Alice can help you with that. But you need to have a strategy that covers all your risks. Alex, that was a great conversation about the move to rail. Now we're going to switch over to the new 2026, or the 25, 26, or whatever we want to call it, TSPA. So there's some cool things in there, and then there's some things that are changing, and then FedEx had to pull some things back inexplicably. You and I've talked about that. But let's talk about some of the changes on the move to on the new TSPA. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you've been an ostrich, or maybe you've been, had your head in the sand for a while, but have missed the announcement. But so FedEx made some announcements about safety technology. I'm a big proponent about safety technology. So and I've been a big user or early adopter of some of the safety technology, which is one of the reasons why I'm a tier 4 safety contractor, and I'm a strong believer in it. That being said, FedEx initially rolled out an announcement that beginning in August or September 1st of 2025, lane keep assist and blind spotter will be mandatory on all tractors. After discussions with a number of contractors, FedEx realized that this was too big of an ask and has adjusted the contract to state that Late keep assist will be a future requirement, but they will give us 6 months worth of notice before they implement it, and it cannot be implemented any earlier than August of 2026. Additionally, they announced that all tractors following the TSPA signing, which is tomorrow, the 29th, and this is a plug for everybody to sign their contract. Beginning on September 1st, tractors will only need to have blind spotter on their passenger side door. Now, I am an early adopter. I believe really strongly in the side radar, and my tractors come equipped with side radar on both sides now. But right now, FedEx is only saying that you need to have side radar on one side. And then they also made an announcement that we still need to get more clarity on, that they want the more robust or advanced versions of forward collision avoidance and mitigation systems, colloquially known as FCAM. They want both the Doppler radar that's in the base of what's my word, on your bumper, and they also want to have a camera that's on the top of the windshield. A lot of the new Freightliners come with that technology as part of the Gen 5 series of Detroit Assurance, but it's not a standard product, and it's not very common, nor is it clarified in the build sheets whether or not a tractor has that. So that's something that we're asking more clarity from FedEx about.
Well, yeah, because that particular requirement goes into effect, tomorrow, right? And so if you begin to add tractors for peak, you got to have the more advanced, I'll use that word, latest generations, probably a better word, FCAN. And, I think there's a question about the availability of such tractors in the marketplace. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think FedEx is going to recognize that camera system, one, is not easily done to understand if it's actually installed in a truck. Based off the build sheet, that two, the camera system in a lot of the better systems also provides a warning, auditory warning that you're approaching a vehicle. I know my Linux cameras, for example, make a noise when I'm getting too close to a vehicle in front of it. So that might serve the same purpose. Long term, I think that camera is going to be installed on all equipment, but it's just not standard right now. So I expect that FedEx will probably come out with additional clarification as they realize that, one, it's tough to tell if the driver has it, and two, the availability is limited.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I try to emphasize in these conversations is FedEx is trying to execute their strategy, okay? And so they're going to force folks to adopt the latest in safety technology because that helps them save money. But at the same time, what they've done in this particular case, and this is why we know there's going to be more clarification coming, is they're going to expect the network to expand by at least 10% during peak. And now all tractors have to have this latest generation FCAM, and that might not be possible. So they could be affecting their ability to execute their strategy. So it's pretty clear there's going to be some more clarification coming on that. And I'm just going to throw something out there without having any information on this, but I've been around FedEx for a minute. I think at some point there's going to be some allowance for these transitions as well. These transitions are going to cost money, and we'll see if in the future maybe there's, not saying there will be, but there could be some allowance for this move to the increased expense that you will face when you purchase tractors with these devices. So, Alex.
I mean, that could definitely be a possibility. I mean, I think that what this all reiterates and boils down to is that FedEx wants a safer network. If you look at the history of the changes that FedEx made, first getting home at night, we all want them to be able to boom upward. But more important than that, for FedEx is their bottom line. They want to reduce the indemnification and the set asides they have to make for accidents. So one of the things that I think you're going to see is continued early adoption of technology to make the fleet safer. And then the other thing you're going to see is you're going to see a movement by FedEx to slowly whittle down the use of pups or doubles and a move to 53s. So I would say my expectation is by 2030, FedEx is probably going to be an entirely all 53 fleet.
Yeah, that would be good for everybody. No one will be sad about that. Now, one of the things that Alex has mentioned here that I want to spend a little more time talking about is he talks about his focus on safety technology. And then what you hear again is he has a strategy, he has a fleet management strategy. He doesn't wake up one day and say, you know what, that truck's getting older, I'm going to go buy a different truck. That's not what he does. He has a specific plan on how you manage the fleet. And one of the things that we want to talk about as part of this fleet management is the fact that going forward, having a truck that's more than 10 years old is going to be, one of the things that you can't do. You're going to have to, you got grandfather tractors, but new tractors added will have to be 10 years old or less. So, Alex, let's talk a little bit about how this change in safety tech, along with the age of tractor rule, how that affects fleet management and what contractors should be doing, and how that might create some opportunities for contractors who do have good fleet management strategies.
Yeah. So FedEx made an announcement that this year, uh, tractors that are 10 years or older will no longer be allowed to be in the fleet. There are a couple questions about how they're going to handle this because it wasn't very specific. It wasn't clarified if you could have spare tractors that are older than 10 years. So there's additional clarification that's going to be coming out. But at this time, in June of 2026, any tractor that is 2015 or older, 2016 or older, will no longer be allowed to carry a dedicated or unassigned run on your A1. And so at that time, if you do not replace that tractor, you are at risk of losing that run. Now, what does this mean? So, for example, for me, I have a fleet strategy. I have a certain number of miles that I want to run my team tractors at, and I have a certain number of miles that I project to run my solo tractors at. And then I replace my tractors on the strategy. So, for example, my team runs, I don't let my team tractors get above 500,000 miles. I replace them at before the 500,000 mile mark. Why is that? Is because one, all my tractors carry a 5-year, 600,000 mile warranty. And so selling them at about, before they hit that 500,000 mile mark gives me a higher residual value when I sell that tractor, because that tractor then has multiple years of warranty and multiple miles of warranty. Two, it also gives me peace of mind. I know that my tractors are generally 2 to 2.5 years old. They're running coast to coast. And so I don't have the fear of them breaking out. Now, my solo tractors are on a different flight path. I generally replace my solo tractors every 5 years. Why is that? Well, I project that I'm going to run a tractor about 150,000 miles per year. That means that replacing my tractors when they hit the 750,000 mile mark, I could run through the warranty, but all my tractors carry again at 5 years, 600,000 mile warranty. And so I'm really only at risk of that last that last year of warranty of the tractor being in service. And I can manage that maintenance load. And that tractors around that 750,000 mile mark are still valuable enough that when I get a decent traded value when I decide to replace that tractor. So for me, this announcement that we're getting rid of 2015 and 2016 tractors next year is not that worrisome for me. As I said, we're in 2025 right now. I do have a couple tractors that are older than 2020, but those are tractors that I bought used at low mileage, and then I decide that I run for 3 or 4 years and then I replace. So I have a plan next year to replace all my 2020 or older, 2019 or older tractors, but that's been my plan all along. And so making this announcement is not going to be an impact. Now, what does this mean for the wider network? There are a lot of contractors out there that brought their tractors into the ground. I'm sure every single one of us has walked into a yard or into a parking lot and said, wow, look at that old tractor over there. I bet you that thing's from 2007. Hell, one of the runs I bought had from a guy a couple of years ago, he had a 2003 Freightliner Coronado running it. I don't even know if they make Coronados, but that just gives you an idea of how old of a tractor that was on that run. So there are going to be opportunities out there for contractors who have either the access to leases. So we're talking, you have a good relationship with Rolling Equity Lease, and you can go out there and lease tractors, and be able to swim in incumbent to those contractors who are and step in for that's sold or is having to sell because you can't reinvest in this fleet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I apologize. On occasion, we're having a little bit of an internet issue, but in general, we're getting we know what Alex is saying here, and he has said a lot there that you should watch back. We'll release this as a recording in the next couple of days, and you should watch this back. There's a lot of things there that you need to have in your company if you don't already have it. You need to spend time and use math and details to develop your tractor strategy, and then stick to it. And there are going to be opportunities for contractors who have very old fleets who don't want to spend the cash to get newer fleets and comply with the rules. Those will create opportunities for guys who have the cash or the capital or the opportunity to have access to capital in order to be able to pursue those. Now, opportunities doesn't mean you're going to get anything if you haven't already planned for that opportunity. So if you expect to be opportunistic, like Alex is, Alex ensures that he has access to capital. He spends a lot of time working with different banks. We've talked about it on podcasts before, to ensure that he has the capital to access opportunities when they present. In fact, Alex just bought a nice business in Memphis with 20 plus trucks because it was an opportunistic opportunity for him to get into a business that he wanted to be in. He's been waiting for it. He finally got the opportunity, and he was able to seize it. So there are a lot of things to learn from today's conversation other than just the FedEx TSPA. It's how you operate your business to be prepared to take advantage of the things that occur when there's changes due to the TSPA. So, Alex, before we move away from this topic, do you have anything else on these changes with respect to the TSPA and associated fleet management strategy, et cetera?
No, I reiterate to everybody that you should be reading the contract. There are a lot of portions, especially in Schedule E and Schedule G, which are safety and insurance, that you need to be able to wrap your head around. There is some changes in Schedule A about how the bidding process will work. There were changes. I think it's actually it kind of levels the playing field between both larger contractors and smaller contractors. There's going to be more information coming out about it. The other thing is that there hasn't been any mention about Spotlight in the TSPA, and I'm looking forward to airing, how Spotlight is going to be utilized by linehaul contractors and how that's going to, how runs are going to be awarded based off of your Spotlight ranking.
Awesome. Well, we're going to move now to the question and answer session. Again, go ahead and get your questions in if you have some. I'm going to look down at my phone and present the questions to Alex. I apologize for doing that. But Alex, we're going to run through, got several questions here, and we're going to see what you have to say about that. So Reza from Southern California says that he is facing a lot of one-way purchase carriers. And when you couple that with rail, how would that affect the TSPA? How would it affect the business opportunities for TSPs?
So if you listen to FedEx's annual meeting, which was back in June, FedEx specifically talked about the fact that they want to try to eliminate or reduce the reliance on outside power as much as possible. In a perfect world, FedEx is using TSPs and RAM. Issue that you run into is, you don't necessarily want to run a trailer or a truck from Memphis to California if you don't have loads for that tractor to go back with. And so they're trying to look at the network and say, okay, hey, we have this freight that needs to go from Memphis to, say, Phoenix. Well, and it can't go on rail because it's not fast enough. So can we figure out a way for that team to backhaul back to Memphis, or do we need to give them a load in Phoenix to go to Rialto, and then from Rialto they go back to Memphis? So it's about FedEx using the technology to become more efficient in their use. So what they want to do is get rid of outside power or reduce the reliance on outside power and rely more and more on TSPs and rail. Now, what you'll see at times is that FedEx will say, okay, we want to get rid of outside power, and then there'll be an increase in outside power. And you're like, what's going on? Well, what happens is FedEx will give indications to TSPs, hey, we have additional work. Well, no TSP stands up and says, hey, I brought this additional work. FedEx has no recourse other than going out to the outside power. So, for example, one thing I don't ever do is I don't ever say no to work. So if FedEx calls me up and says, hey, I got another Chicago run for you, I got another Memphis run for you, I got another KCMO run for you, my response to them is, I got a tractor and a driver, just tell me when you want me to start running. I got a call 2 weeks ago, sorry. Hey, we have this new run that we want to test out on Tuesday to see if it makes sense. Can you cover it? Yep, no problem.
I mean, that's a great point. I did the same thing when I was a contractor. I can't tell you the number of runs that I
not for that work, or two going to a outside carrier. So I just took the work, and then I'll figure out and get creative on how I staff it.
Yeah, all businesses are focused on revenue, So I just took the same approach when I was a contractor. I can't tell you the number of runs that I tested out for FedEx to see if they would work. I didn't always get the run when they got posted, but I got the money whenever I was testing it, and that was just kind of the approach I took, which is the same one that Alex has. So we can't give you a specific answer on what might be happening in Southern California, but we don't anticipate that long-term strategy includes using just purchase power and rail and replacing TSPs. That is not what FedEx says is their strategy.
Now, I will say this, Reza, and this is something that the entire network needs to understand long-term. FedEx's perfect universe is that they have the ability to relay every single load across the country and never have to use a team. Now, is that possible? No, it's impossible. But FedEx would love to figure out a way that you could run a solo from Memphis all the way to Rialto, California, and still get there in the same amount of time that it takes a team. Now, that takes a great deal of coordination. It means that you have a solo tractor that runs from Memphis and it bumps with somebody in Tulsa, and then Tulsa has somebody that bumps with somebody in Albuquerque, and then Albuquerque has somebody that bumps with somebody in Flagstaff, and then Flagstaff has somebody that bumps with somebody in Rialto, and then goes all the way back. Now, that takes a tremendous amount of coordination to achieve, and it has not figured out how to do that yet. But that's the holy grail. So in 5 years and 10 years, FedEx is going to figure out how to make that work. And that's what they want to get to, because on a dollars per mile, solos are cheaper than teams.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with linehaul senior managers going back 5 years on how they would like to get into what they call freight relay. Certainly, it's a less expensive option for them. But, I don't think at the current time we've demonstrated the ability to manage that coordination. We're all frustrated about what happens with different butt heads with just out and ins, right? So that is something they definitely want to do, and I do think you might see that in the future. The strategy at FedEx is not to eliminate TSPs. However, that doesn't mean that on the local basis, remember this business is all local, that there might be some things that transpire that's specific to that local terminal's business. Thanks for that question, Reza. And we got Doug Woodcock's got several questions here, but what do you think, Alex? We talked, I talked with Matt Woodruff a couple months back, and we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that FedEx was number 2 in revenue, but number 4 or 5 in package delivery. In other words, volume. And so they effectively lost market share. Do you think that this move to rail could have an impact on service levels that might then impact FedEx's market share?
No, I actually think that the move to rail is going to actually help FedEx achieve better operational efficiency. So what it means is that FedEx is going to be better at identifying which freight needs to be on which trailer or which container. So freight, like we've talked about, anything that needs to be there in 2 or 3 days, FedEx is going to prioritize putting on the trailer that a truck is going to deliver. And anything that's going to be longer than 4 days, FedEx is going to put into a container that then they're going to ship by rail. And so what you're going to see is that shippers are going to be notified FedEx what this stuff needs to be there, and their freight is going to get into a location on time more often. So I bet you when FedEx announces their on-time efficiency matrices over the next year, they're going to have a higher on-time delivery target than they had in the past. We always used to talk about the fact that the gold standard was Amazon with their on time, and then it was UPS, and then it was FedEx, and then it was USPS. Well, FedEx recognizes that they need to get better on on-time delivery, and they're targeting UPS, and they're thinking that the move to rail is going to help them achieve a better on-time efficiency ratio.
Yeah, it's interesting. UPS is going the opposite direction, right? They're moving away from rail. So somebody's going to be right. Do you think, Alex, that east-west runs are more at risk than north-south runs, or is it really has to do with the number of days in the lane, like we talked about earlier?
I mean, I think, it's the number of days in the lane, but at the end of the day, you can get from Houston to Minneapolis in 1 day. So, the north-south lanes are not going to be as sensitive. And also, if you look at our rail network is built around going east-west.
Right.
It's not really effective to go north-south. Like, you cannot take something from Missoula and send it to Phoenix on a rail line that goes direct. If you want to send something from Missoula to get to Phoenix, it's either going to have to go to Chicago or it's going to have to go to Portland. And then it's going to go down to California and then across, or it's going to go to Chicago and down to Memphis, and then it's going to go across. So our rail networks are built to go east-west, not north-south. Except in Chicago, walk on the north-south, there's not going to be as much risk there.
Yeah, sorry, we had another internet glitch there. So, Alex, have you had any conversations with folks that can tell you what the impact on move to rail might mean in the Canadian contractor space?
I have not. Honestly, if I were a contractor that works in Canada, I would try to reach out to either Kevin Kokanen or Mike Tiefenthaler and get their impression about it. I would imagine, the distances in Canada are so great. It takes a long time to move freight from, like, say, Quebec to Vancouver, or you from Toronto to Vancouver. So I don't have any opinions on that, and I don't know what's going to happen there. But my suggestion will be to reach out to either Mike Tiefenthaler or to Kevin Kokanen and have a frank one-on-one discussion with them about it. They're very proud. We're a Canadian network. So I think that they will be upfront with their Canadian TSPs.
Yeah, the population centers are so spread out in Canada. I'm sure they have east-west rail there, though, so we could see how that goes. So let's see here. So, Alex, we talked about this a little bit, but we're going to ask a little more question on it. If you have a business, and we did talk about this a little bit in our prep, if you have a business that primarily has old tractors, how does that affect your valuation, given that those tractors are grandfathered, at the current time, and then if you have an old fleet, how do you adjust the multiple? You might be a profitable business, with a nice, maybe you're doing 20 points a year, but you have an old fleet. So how would you approach the valuation on something like that?
Well, so first of all, in general, if you're running an old fleet, you're probably going to have a very high maintenance expense, and so that's probably cannibalizing your margins. So I'd be surprised if you have a really expensive margins. That being said, I devalue a business quite a bit if I'm knowing that I have to come in and replace the entire fleet. I'm unwilling to pay 3.5 times, 4 times, quarter tax for a business that I know I'm going to have to replace the time for either. And that's just a function of when you're evaluating that business in a cash flow multiple or an EBITDA multiple, you're also taking into effect what are the assets of the business. So you have goodwill. So we're really getting esoteric here. So the equity in your business is your runs. You have the assets, which are the trucks, and then you have the goodwill, which is the multiple that you're willing to pay for that those assets, and the equity, which is your runs. Now, if you're a spot business, this is totally different. But so the goodwill becomes that multiple. You're going to pay less goodwill for something that has poor assets too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of consulting with folks on business valuation, and that's exactly how I would do it. You're going to have to spend money, the money that you might have paid for a company that has a new fleet. You're not going to pay in the transition in terms of the acquisition, and because you're going to turn around and spend that money on upgrading the fleet. You end up somewhere in about the same amount of money going out to make the acquisition. But the owner of the company that has old trucks is going to be negatively impacted by that. Thanks for that question, Ed. And we got a question from Tyrone Davis. Do you think the transition to rail is going to have any negative impact in the Savannah region? I mean, I have my opinions on that, but let's see what you have to say.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think the what you're going to see is a lot of the West Coast freight that comes out of the Savannah market is going to be moved to the rail. Now, the Savannah market is going through a tremendous amount of transition. So initially, it was just all teams taking all that freight and either moving it, and solos either moving it to Atlanta or Marietta to get sorted, and or teams taking it to further locations with direct containers. And now what you're starting to see is a really robust spot market developing in the Savannah market where there's a lot of opportunities. And so there's so much expansion going on there. But I think eventually what you're going to see is a lot of the slow freight that needs to go to the West Coast or go beyond, say, the Mississippi is going to be moved by rail. And everything that needs to stay east of the Mississippi is going to be moved by track.
Yeah, well, that's a great analysis. Certainly, it's boom time in Savannah, right? It's like the oil boom, man. It is. They're building the fourth building in Savannah. Certainly, trying to get a truck on in Savannah would be a very, very good strategic move. And if you have runs in Savannah and you're ready to exit, they're probably worth more than 4x if you're performing well enough in terms of miles you're running and the value of your tractors, etc. So
The Going back to that, I think the next two locations that are going to be really booming in the FedEx network are going to be probably Houston next. We're seeing a lot more shipping containers diverted to Houston because it's a deep water port and they have a lot of infrastructure facilities there to handle it. And then the next one is probably going to be in 2 or 3 years once they finish their dredging and their port facilities. It's going to be the Port of Charleston in South Carolina.
absolutely, and I've done some consulting work for folks that purchase businesses in Charleston, and that's how we valued that. They are looking to take on Savannah, that took over some of that overflow that's coming out of Savannah right now. So look, this has been a great conversation. Alex, any final thoughts on any of the topics that we've talked about, or maybe the upcoming FedEx Forward Summit?
Well, I'm really looking forward to being at the FedEx Forward Summit. I find that to be one of the most valuable opportunities, not only to network with other contractors, but to network with other vendors like Tim and some of my other, the REL guys. I always enjoy meeting up with them there and down there. But the most important portion is the going into the vendor session and finding the personnel from PGH, from Pittsburgh. So all the different functional areas in PGH will have a booth in the vendor area. And so, right next to, Tim or the REL guys might be the linehaul engineering, or might be linehaul fuel, or might be FADV, or the tractor file guys. So if you have specific concerns or questions or comments, or want to talk to them about the processes or have suggestions, the opportunity is invaluable to go to the Forward Summit and go into the vendors and finding those different functional areas from PGH. I find it extremely valuable. I've learned a lot to talk to them and understanding how do they construct runs, how do they determine settlements, and on top of that, also just having connections. So, like, if I have an issue with fuel, I know I can reach out to Lee If I have an issue with Sullivan, I can reach out to Charlotte. So it's really, really helpful to go out there to the Orlando and meet with the different components of PGH or FedEx in the vendor sessions.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the case. And hey, I'll be there. Come see me. A couple questions.
See, I'm the 6'5" ball guy out there.
Yeah, yeah, they'll be easy to spot. So look, there's a couple more questions here about, where you can get help with planning and strategizing, consulting. Certainly you can reach out to us at mygroundforce.com. We can help you with all those things. That question came from Terrell Jackson. And Chris Wagner has a question about when you're doing due diligence, how do you assess the potential risk that FedEx might realign stations in a particular geography?
That's a very challenging question. What I haven't seen done is FedEx ever get rid of a station. I've seen them consolidate Express into a station or consolidate a station into Express. And when that's happened, the TSPs are fine. They're just migrated or moved over. I've never seen FedEx actually abandon a station. Have you, Tim?
No, they've been constructing some stations to be more aligned with 2.0, and they've combined some. They are closing express stations now. That's happening. But what were previously ground stations, I haven't seen a station just completely go away. But look, anything can happen in this transformation. We don't get they don't share their plans until they're going to affect a contractor. So certainly these kinds of things you can take into account.
I will say this, every single time FedEx has opened a station or a new hub in a location, they've always gone to the existing TSP base and say, hey, we're looking for volunteers to move.
That's correct.
So, for example, it wasn't my market, but in the FedEx last year, 2 years ago, opened up a new hub in the Indianapolis market. And so they went to people in the hub area. So it was pretty much like the North Indy, South Indy. They went to them and said, hey, we're looking for contractors willing to move to Greenwood. And that was a great opportunity for a lot of those contractors. They got new runs. They didn't have to spend a whole lot of points to win runs. And a lot of them got awarded dedicated runs pretty quickly. So whenever you see an opportunity that a station is going to get realigned or get moved, it's usually a great opportunity for those TSPs to grow and expand pretty quickly.
Yeah, I took advantage of that myself a couple times.
So yeah, you had the best of opportunity.
Yeah. That's another story over beers at the FedEx Forward Summit. That was a good one. Me and Jeff Grimm will probably have beers around that one. So anyway, folks, it's been a pleasure to host my close friend, Alex Frum. Very, very wise man. He really knows business. He understands the numbers, okay? All business is about fundamentals, and fundamentals are all about the numbers. We can certainly help you know the numbers at myGroundForce. So give us a call. Reach out to us at mygroundforce.com. We can do consulting with you. We can certainly help you understand your business more deeply, given all the various AI technologies that we use to give you your numbers. But today, hopefully you feel good about the fact that we really in detail gone through the move to rail with the information we have available. And then we've also gone over the new TSPA. Alex and I will see you at the FedEx Forward Summit in a couple weeks. And after that, sometime in September, we'll have a new episode of the Taking Care of Business podcast. Thanks again to Alex Frum. This is Tim Goff, CEO and founder of myGroundForce. We'll see you again soon.